As I argued in part 1, I very strongly recommend having the debate about men's choices before you discuss the women in the trade, and pointing out how the degree of voluntarism doesn't greatly change the odds of experiencing violence. But if someone insists that you do, you should come armed with some of these arguments. Explain why choice is complicated. Prostitution as a system works to undermine women making choices. A woman coerced through violence or poverty quite obviously has her choice compromised, but not all women are beaten or starved into prostitution. One factor which is common amongst prostitute women is the history of surviving emotional, physical, or often sexual abuse and violence. This factor has been suggested as even stronger than the factor of poverty, meaning that amongst economically disadvantaged populations, not all women are equally likely to opt for prostitution. Some will instead opt for underpaid or illegal jobs. Those who choose prostitution over poverty most of the time have a history of surviving sexual violence. And this explains largely why a middle-class woman or a girl might find herself in prostitution as well. At some point in the life of a prostitute woman or girl, someone taught her that she was worthless, and the only thing of value that she could do was to give sexual access to men. The more, the better. I'm a middle-class white woman, and I've seen this happen to teenage girls and young women around me. Women from financially stable but emotionally or physically abusive homes, or sexual assault survivors, turning to promiscuity as a form of trauma reenactment and a form of self-harm. And that's not me making a judgment. That is the analysis of their own situation is made by many of these sexual assault survivors themselves. I can't count the number of times that a currently or formerly prostitute woman said, "I've been abused all my life. I figured since I can't stop it from happening, I might at least get paid. Money is better than nothing." Here are some more quotes from prostitution survivors about this phenomena. Andrea Dworkin once said that incest is the boot camp for prostitution. Deep in my bones, I know this to be true. Turning my first trick was no different from being raped by my stepfather. Traumatic situations can be addictive because they cause a massive release of adrenaline, and that is addictive. Additionally, a violent situation is something well known to people who have experienced as much violence as that in prostitution. I learned from early childhood on, the place where I am afraid, where I am hurt, where I am degraded, is the place where I belong. That is home. That is why even today I still have to struggle in situations that endanger me, and to decide against the danger and to walk away. The situations are shite, but they're familiar. I know them. Situations in which people are nice to me, don't shout, don't batter, don't abuse me, feel creepy. I promptly feel inferior. My soul signals to me, something is wrong here. This is alien. Prostitution is like self-harm. No, prostitution is self-harm. Before I finish this point, I also want to recommend, if you're talking to a feminist who is aware of rape and our pedophilia culture, then make sure to point out to them how our very culture itself aids rapists and pimps when it bombards little girls with the message, be pretty, be fuckable, or be invisible, from the time that they enter kindergarten. How freely can women and girls make choices about giving access to their bodies to dozens and dozens upon strange men when they live in a culture that has likely let individual men perpetrate violence against them and or has been feeding them the message about the importance of fuckability for as long as they can remember? Evidence that no one's body is made to be prostituted. Pro-prostitution advocates frequently unintentionally concede this point. They routinely manufacture material which is supposed to advise prostitute people on how to prevent bodily harm from prostitution, thus revealing how the sex industry pushes people's bodies to their limits and can cause severe long-term damage. No one's body, not even the biggest nymphomaniac in the world, actually can stand being penetrated by 10 to 30 male strangers every single day. Pro-prostitution advocates know this, and although they don't name it so directly, they reveal it through their safety pamphlets to prostituted people, which for example recommend types of lube, painkillers, and pain-dulling creams to be applied on the genitals or anus. If the sex taking place inside prostitution was one stemming from enthusiastic consent and mutual arousal, prostitute women and men would not be suffering from chronic pain and exhaustion directly connected to the penetration taking place. Pain in the genitals is just the most obvious example, but prostitute people additionally list chronic exhaustion, chronic nausea at the smell and taste of undesired men, severe jaw ache from blowjob after blowjob, and of course the fear and reality of STDs, pregnancy, or vaginal and anal prolapse, the latter being especially prevalent in the porn industry. Your opponent may believe that prostitution is a viable occupational option, but the human body is evidently saying otherwise. No matter who you're talking to about prostitution, if they're not prostituted themselves, make them answer the following question. If prostitution is a job like any other, like say flipping burgers, then I wager you would have absolutely no issue switching job with a prostituted person for one day, and let it be your anus that's penetrated in a state of non-arousal by 15 men during one night. Once you put yourself and your body in the position of a prostituted person, you'll probably feel a lot less fine about prostitution. Kudos to Sabrina Valise for this brilliant and effective summary. Lastly, show how prostitution is incompatible with enthusiastic sexual consent. During the course of a discussion, or several, what tends to happen in my experience is that your opponent starts backing into a corner and constructing more and more absurd scenarios, which usually end with a vision of prostitution wherein men who wish to buy women first have to get to know them, woo them, and, if she doesn't return their affections, accept being rejected. What they're then describing is nothing other than paid dating. If your opponent arrives at this point, they have conceded to you that in prostitution money replaces consent, and that prostitute women aren't sexually interested in the men who buy access to their bodies. A man capable of truly charming a woman and getting her sexually interested in him would never dream of or need to pay her. There isn't an industry for women who can only be accessed if men work really hard to impress them. A world where two partners actually have to get to know each other, at least for one evening, and make sure that they find each other equally likable, can be had for free, and it's called dating. Selling dating as a business model would be a horrible failure, because men would never pay for something if, with the same offer, it can be had for free. That's why there is no industry for egalitarian sex with enthusiastic consent. There is, however, an industry in which there is always a woman to be found who can be accessed, no matter how grossed out or frightened she is of the men who buy her, and that is what we call prostitution.